everyone, and welcome to the Quitcast. My name is Becca. It has been a hot second since we saw each other last, and so I'm going to jump right back into the spot that we were at because we had just talked about, am I going to burn out again, right? So the question that we had opened this sustainability discussion with is, am I going to burn out again? And my hope was there's a possibility that we won't, right? So I'm going to build on the assumption that we're fixing what we can fix about that original discussion. And we are trying to make the sustainable business happen from a will burnout be a major factor or not? And if you're still not sure, I would go back and I would watch our burnout series, and we'll try to put a link to that in the show notes as well. But I want to build on the basic foundation that we're assuming either I'm out of burnout or I'm addressing the burnout issues. And I want to talk about the building blocks of sustainability for author businesses. If you followed us for any length of time, you know that we talk a lot about Clifton strengths. And so I want to talk about the benefit that certain strengths bring to a conversation that wouldn't otherwise be present if you don't have those instincts. I had a conversation with a client once where we were talking about the building blocks of her business, and she happens to be high in both focus and discipline. And so her intentions are very much about, if you know discipline, you know that it is this replicatable, right? Like, can I continue to do this over and over? Because I want the momentum to be produced by me making the same decision over and over again. And high discipline people are very momentum friendly. They like momentum. And so we were talking about the building blocks, and she made a comment about how when she was originally founding her author business, which was a long time ago, but when she was originally founding it, she had asked herself the question, is this something that I could sustain? So in other words, she literally asked herself, if I had to do it this way forever, would I be able to do it? And that simple alignment question of, no, this is not a sustainable model for me. So like those of us who got in, for instance, during the gold rush, which is over, by the way, but those of us who got in during the gold rush and you really were benefited by this insane amount of production of content because there was so much openness in the market in those years that the faster you could get content out, the easier it was to make money. And we all knew on some level, or hopefully we did, maybe not all of us do consciously, but we all knew that at some point the market rules would change and it would start to become a pay to play economy, because that's how emerging markets work. It is when you realize the market is there, it's much easier to do business without having to advertise and without having to count costs and without having to have a structure of a business, because the need is so great that everyone who shows up can get in on it, right? Like that was very much the early years of the independent publishing. And then once you get to a sustainable place where the market is full, the people who are major players, and now it's shifting around, and then new people coming in, and it is a very different industry than it was 8 years ago, 6 years ago. Now that we're in a more established place, there still is a lot of openness in the market in terms of nothing is settled. Like, it's not that because you're not big now, you can't ever be big. The difference is, how do I get to that place, right? So when she was asking herself this question, she was saying, okay, for a short period of time, I know we're in a gold rush, so I'm going to have to do this level of content production. And then, is it sustainable for me? And eventually she reached a point where she was like, okay, this many books is not sustainable. And now I want to change it because I don't want to build a business for myself that is reliant on me doing something that I can't sustain with the energy that I'm producing. And so often the first question that we have to ask is, if you had to do this for the rest of your business, would you be able to do that? And almost all businesses that grow very quickly at the very beginning have that sense of, I know I can't maintain this. And then they have to sort of normalize into, what can I actually maintain? And that might mean bringing on support. It might mean me changing my expectations. It might mean readjusting to new financial realities, et cetera. There are all kinds of questions that might have to happen. But if you are currently expending energy at a level that you can't sustain for the next 15 years, and you know it, you know you'll either burn out, which will crash your business, or you will just not be able to sustain it and you'll eventually have to normalize anyway. It is a good idea to ask yourself if you're building the business you want. So if you're building a business where you are required to produce content every day, every other day, etc., there is no promise that at some point in the future that's going to become easier. In fact, an awful lot of the people who at some point in the future themselves into a business that they don't want will sort of wake up in this moment of, I don't want to produce 12 books a year, or I don't want to produce, 2 books a year, or whatever it is that is pushing you to your limit. I don't want to do that. And then they have to renegotiate what's possible for them and what isn't. And my goal in asking this question is just to bring some level of reality to the situation. Have you ever asked yourself the question of, would you be okay if the business had to stay the way that it is? Especially if you assume, because we talked about this in the last video, that my expectations of, if I work harder, I will grow at an exponential level because my hard work is what's making me make more money. And that isn't always true. It's especially not true in entertainment industries, where the majority of people who are in an entertainment industry are not making large amounts of money. They may be making some money, but they're not making large amounts of money, sustainable amounts of money. So then the question becomes, if I had to maintain this level of input, production, maintain my lack of reading, maintain my lack of vacation, maintain whatever it is, could I do that? Like, could I force myself to do that? And not in a idealistic way, but in a reality way. Like, if I never get to take a vacation for the rest of my life, am I going to be okay with that? If I never get to, be present at my kid's soccer game, am I going to be okay with that? Whatever it is that you're giving up right now to get to this point in the future where you might be able to give it up because you're making that more money, I do think it's important to ask that question, especially what happens if I don't? What happens if I do? Like, those two questions are really important to answer for yourself. Some of you who are super high in adaptability don't need to ask yourselves these questions, because you will not act any differently today based on the answers. But those of you who are even relatively high in strategic, futuristic, ideation, context, deliberative, responsibility, I would keep naming execution strengths, but I think it's usually coming from one of those other places. Anything that has any level of anticipation and commitment, or anticipation or commitment, I guess, will probably need to have this conversation with themselves in terms of, if I have to spend what I have to spend now advertising, if I have to always spend what I have to spend now in time, in editing, in whatever it is, right? Any of those areas. And I do think looking at every resource, including time, attention, and finances, is important. But if I had to do that to sustain, could I? Right? It's one of the reasons that when we're doing coaching, we ask you so many questions about, like, what are you doing right now? What's your production like? What's your process like? We try to get a sense for, especially in our Bright, Better, Faster experience, right? We try to get a good sense for, what are your current commitments? What are you currently doing? Where is your margin? Because we've coached enough writers to know that a lack of margin eventually is an issue. And we want to ask those questions sooner rather than later. So if you haven't ever considered, could I continue to do this forever? Am I going to be okay going without sleep? That answer is no, by the way. Biologically, no, you can't. Am I going to be okay? So those of you who do coaching, therapy, or something where you commit your own personal time on like an hour by hour basis, teaching, stuff like that, right? If I had to continue teaching 9 months a year for the rest of my adult life, right? The rest of my working life, could I do that? If I had to continue taking 7 clients a day, 6 clients a day, 5 clients a day, every day, for the rest of my professional career, could I do that? And if the answer is no, then we have to genuinely look at what it is that's causing us to make those choices. Are we making an assumption about something is going to change because I'm working this hard, right? And then at some point, if you continue to work that hard and work that hard and work that hard and nothing changes, then we have to ask the question, is this sustainable after all? Because some of us have been doing this for long enough that we've gone through sort of periods of this before. Either we burn out and then we have to ask the sustainability question, or something changes or shifts, something goes down and we have to ask sustainability questions, and we don't go after the actual things that are causing our sustainability issues, which are always about the imbalance of our resources. How am I using my time, attention, and finances in a way that is not replicatable, like in a way that's not creating more energy pennies or actual pennies for me? I do think it's important to ask those questions because, again, those of us who have any level of either anticipatory strengths or commitment strengths, we know that what we build is what we have. So if you decide today to take on an extra 2 contracts with your New York publisher every year, in order to make a certain amount of money, and then that means that you have to give up something, right? Like I talk in the Write Better Faster class about how I had to give up my bell choir, when I was first starting this, right? And I had that decision of like, is this something that I want to do long term? Am I okay with this? And just asking that question, is there something I can sacrifice? Because some of us don't have that margin right now. Some of us are operating on such full throttle levels that we're not even asking the question, is this sustainable? And so the very beginning of this series on sustainability and scalability has to be just asking the question, if I continued to do this same week over and over again for forever, this same quarter, this same year, every year for forever, not again, not forever, but through my working years, could I do that? And if not, so that's the first question we ask, right? Could I keep doing it? And if not, what do I need instead? So not what would I like, because some of us have that, like, well, what I would really like is to immediately go to like, well, I'd like to make $1 million and have this house or $10 million or whatever, and take 6 weeks of vacation and do et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, right. That's a great thing to have. And those of you who are positivity or futuristic, like absolutely set your goals in that direction. But the 75% of us who don't have either one of those strengths need to think differently about how we're setting our expectations. And frankly, we can't listen to the people who are telling us to overset expectations, because we will anticipate and act in that way, or we will make commitments that will direct us in that way. So we have to be very cautious about how we make commitments with our time, especially those of us who struggle to walk back commitments. So if you have, if you're working an hourly job and your boss says, hey, can you take an extra shift this Monday? And you say yes. And then Monday turns into Monday and Wednesday. And then it turns into Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then it turns into every week for the foreseeable future, because they have now gotten used to you being the person who steps in on those shifts. Then all of a sudden you have to have a very uncomfortable conversation. And some of us with a lot of dominant blue strengths are not equipped to have those kinds of conversations naturally. And we have to go looking for outside support and skills to make them, which takes a lot of time and effort and energy to accomplish. And often it's easier for us to just let it slide and just do the thing until we can't do it anymore, right? Until we burn ourselves out. But we make commitments with our time and attention that we don't always anticipate, oh, this might bite me later, because I'm telling these people that I'm willing to give them this amount of time or this amount of my energy or whatever in order to make this thing happen, but I'm not counting the cost, the future cost, right? So the very first question in any conversation about sustainability 100% of the time is, if I had to do this all the time, could I sustain it? And if not, then that's a different conversation. That's probably a coaching conversation that we need to have, right? Because some of us, if we need to look at how do we actually align and walk back what we're doing, some of us have to realign completely in terms of like what is it that my strengths want out of this situation? What is going to make me feel successful? What's going to make my family feel successful? What's going to make my job feel successful? What's going to make my bank account feel successful, right? Like there are all kinds of questions that might have to get answered. And that's why we are such huge fans of coaching, no matter who you talk to, right? Like whatever kind of coaching you're doing, you're getting perspective on those questions. And it's more helpful to have perspective than to not have it. And again, you can get coaching from people who are your friends, who are fellow authors. You can get coaching from like certified coaches or uncertified coaches, or I'm not going to set your agenda for you, even though I know there are people out there who are like, just say it, Becca. I know some of you are saying this. Yeah, I think we do a good job of this. So if I had to choose, I would tell you to come to us, but not everybody's going to come to us, and I'm okay with that. But I do think that getting that perspective is important when your answer is, no, I definitely can't sustain this. And I know that reckoning is coming soon. Either it's coming now, it's already come, it's coming quickly, or it's coming soon. When my answer is, I definitely can't sustain this and I feel like I'm on the edge, that's the most important time to come and get support for sure. When though, because some of you have been through burnout, you've done some reckoning, you're trying to change things, and you're still finding like, I don't think I can even keep this pace sustainably, then how do you do that? And this is kind of the second piece of this conversation I want to have today is how do we execute cutting back on some of those things when we have to. Some of this we would do in coaching if I could do one-on-one with you, which I do, again, I think would be easier, but I'm going to try to give you some general principles about how to make this happen based on what I would usually coach. The first question is, and this is to find the action point that you need to take. You have to be able to identify for yourself. And this will take some analyzing and maybe some perspective. What is it about this particular situation that is unsustainable for you? So in the situation with a boss, for instance, is it the number of shifts? Could I cut back to one and be okay? Is it the addition to my regular work hours? I just can't sustain regular work hours. Is it the particular people that you're working with? Is it the type of work they have you doing? Like, what is it about that situation that doesn't work for you? And if it's a like personal or writing situation, can you identify what it is about that writing situation that you don't want to continue doing? So that's the first question. And then the second question after that is, depending on what the answer is, if you change that thing, is it going to significantly impact the way that you feel about that job? So if I am doing less hours of human one-on-one contact, if I am am I introverted, right? Is that going to make me feel better? Will I have more time to myself if I'm doing just fewer hours? Is it there's too much stress in that job, in the extra hours? There's too much stress, there's too much I can't fix, right? Is that the problem? Like, are you going to feel better? Is there a personality alignment in you? And so I'll just give the two examples that I gave. The more introverted you are, right? Like intellection, relator, context, analytical, things like that, that trend with, not that require you to be introverted, but the trend with introversion, especially the thinking strengths which tend to need more alone time, generally speaking. Is the alone time itself going to feed some part of me that's not currently getting fed? Because that is an important question to ask. I think the quick answer is always like, we'll just quit it, we'll just stop doing it, well, whatever. But if quitting that particular behavior is not going to solve the problem, we don't want to quit the behavior. But if the reason that you're so frustrated is because you're not getting enough alone time, or there are too many people, or there are too many emotions, then that should solve the problem, right? Like you should fix the drain in that particular situation. If it's the second option, which was about there's something I'm being expected to do that I'm not capable of doing, Like, are there problems that are unsolvable? Or am I not being presented with enough problems, right? Because some of you have a high need for challenge. And when you are not presented with problems consistently enough, you get really worn out and burned out. But if that's solving a strengths problem in terms of like, I'm high strategic, I'm high analytical, I'm high ideation, high significance, I want to do things that matter, right? Strategic and analytical and ideation context. I want to do smart things. I want to be helpful, your input, right? Is the stopping of doing that behavior fixing the problem? And again, some of this may have to happen in coaching because it's very, very specific to you as a person. But I do think these general guidelines can help. And then the third question is it reasonable to stop right now? Or am I going to have to phase this out? In the case of the 3 ongoing shifts that you had taken on, it might not be reasonable for you to be able to just stop doing those completely, because there might be something that you've started in those shifts that you need to finish, or it might be more reasonable to cut back to 2 or to cut back to 1. It may have been unreasonable for them to ask you to do it in the first place, and you may need to go 100% cut back just to be responsible to your own time. And that might be a hard conversation again, and which we'll talk about in the 4th step. But the third question is really about phasing, right? Like, is it possible for me to phase this out, or do I need to stop immediately? And this is more of the, is it going to burn me out too quickly question, or did I commit to something that I need to finish? Reasonably commit, again, reasonably commit. And then the 4th piece is, what do I need in order to make that happen? Like, do I need some kind of support, skill, tool? Do I need a person to help me with this? Do I need someone else to step in on my behalf? Do I need some kind of intervention? Do I need some kind of tool or skill that I can learn? And this, again, these are not always questions that you can answer for yourself. And this is part of why when we have these conversations on the Quitcast, I don't just say, here are the answers to the question, because they're different for literally every person. And if I say you should do this and you go and do it and it doesn't work, like, I don't want you to waste your time doing that. But I do think that the fourth piece of the skills is so important, skills and support. Because if you have a need for skill and support and you are not having that met, and you do actually need to phase the thing out and it is going to solve the problem, right? Like, we figured all that stuff out, but you just don't have the tools to do it, then you're going to continue to be stuck in that unsustainable place. So whatever tools we need to acquire to do that, then we want to make sure, is there a person that I can talk to or find or grab to help me with this? Or is there a skill or tool that I can grab for that? I always want you to be thinking about that. So often, when we've identified the thing that we don't like and we've decided that it will fix the problem and we're looking to fix it, we miss that 4th piece of the skills and support. And then we end up burning out, or we end up miserable, or we end up back in the same situation again. So I always want us to go in looking for specifically skills and support. If I don't have the skill to execute that, if I can't naturally see what needs to happen in that situation, and I don't have the skill to execute it, then I absolutely need to go looking for the support to find it. And this is, again, why we suggest coaching so often, because we see these situations so consistently. It's usually a very easy question for us to answer. In fact, most of the time we can probably handle this in our small group coaching, which is our micro coaching sessions. And those, you only have to talk with a coach for 10 minutes. And usually we can catch those things fairly quickly. But if you do need a longer coaching session, or again, you may need to talk to a completely different style or type of coach, because it might be out of our realm that we can help you with. But I do always like to see people start thinking about skills and support, because that is so often the place where we stop. We want to stop with all the information, and we want the information to just magically produce the thing that we need to do. We don't recognize that if we don't have the skills to act on that information, the information itself is never going to help us. It's not going to magically produce the skills. We have to develop and execute the skills. So anyway, I'm going to stop here, because we are going to get more into some other pieces of sustainability and also scalability in this series. It's going to be a short series. I don't anticipate that it's going to be longer than about 4 videos total. So this is the second one. I do think it's an important conversation to have, though, both because we are exiting the you have to do it now or it's never going to happen place of publishing. There just isn't the same level of that capacity for let's execute it now and then everyone's going to have success. That has kind of passed in the gold rush. And so now that we are in normal time for the industry, and we're seeing like the rise of services proliferate, we're seeing the rise of advertising and pay to play, like companies are starting to get solidified. Everything, these are all the evidence that the gold rush is done and that we are in the normal time of the industry. So if we are in normal time, then scalability and sustainability become the most important questions that we can ask ourselves, just again from a business development perspective, because the business that you build is the business that you will have. And this was why when I was referring to my client who asked this question, and of course, again, being like focused discipline, knowing there are things that I have to keep out of my periphery if I want to be able to succeed at this long term, and prioritize the parts of the business that were the most important for her to do. And then set the boundaries around those things, right? And now she has a very similar business to what she did when she started in terms of her level of creativity and investment and her level of time and attention that she spends in it, but also looking forward then, and this was kind of the discussion that, you know, I would primarily have with people who are wired like her, but also like it can be helpful just to hear this, is once you reach a success point where, again, not everybody does, but if you do reach a success point where you're having cash intake and you're having, you know, success and there are readers coming, then you have to look at like whether or not I've built a business for myself with the success that I've had that I can actually continue to do for forever. Because so many of us, I can't tell you how many times this situation happens to me. Why could I write so much faster and better when I first started writing? And then we start asking questions about like, well, I don't know, let's figure out why. So when they first started writing, all they were doing was writing. They might have been doing some learning and class taking and, you know, things like that. But when they first started writing, they were primarily just writing. And now they are running a giant business, right? They are trying to be on social media all the time, trying to run ads, trying to keep up with everything, trying to do everything, and also still have time to write at the level that they were writing when they first started, which is what their readers have become accustomed to. And then I always have to say, hold on a second. That's why. Like, we did a Quitcast on this a while before, right? And I may have to do another one because I feel like you can never say this enough. You just told me why you're burned out and you can't do this and you can't write at the speed that you used to write, because this is what took your time up running this giant business. And having that moment of like, oh, it snuck up on me, right? Like, oh, I just kept adding this thing that everybody said you had to add. And I kept, you know, expanding into this thing everybody said you had to expand into. And now I have a business that is 99% me doing my author business and 1% or, you know, 10% or 15% or 20% me doing what I actually got into this business to do. And long term, that is not sustainable. It is just not sustainable. And so when we're thinking about how we make our author businesses sustainable, the first thing we have to always do is ask ourselves, can I imagine doing this exact thing over and over for forever? Or is there something that I'm longing for in the future, right? What am I longing for? And then how do I set myself up for that? So anyway, you can go back and watch the questions again, etc. But I just want to give this sort of brief introduction to our discussion of sustainability in author businesses. For those of you who are going to NINC, I will be there. We're going to be discussing something very similar to this at NINC. And then additionally, I will be at RAM. I'll be at 20 books. I'm going to be, you know, I'll be everywhere. come and find me if you are a Quitcast listener and you're coming to a conference. It was so great to meet all of the Australian watchers and listeners that we have at the Romance Writers of Australia conference that I was at. It was just phenomenal to be around writers who get this stuff, right? Who get the what to quit, what to keep, what to question, who get the concept of alignment. It was just so fantastic. And I had such a great time meeting all of you. And I look forward to meeting more of you in person in the future. So your homework, should you choose to accept it, is, I'm tempted to say choose to accept it or not, but I won't. Should you choose to accept it, is to imagine yourself doing what you're doing now for the rest of your adult life. And if that fills you with dread, then you have to look at, what is it that's causing me to feel this way? What part of my life, the way that it's organized right now, is not fitting into what I want it to be? And then you have to start walking yourself through that process and asking yourself the sustainability questions, and then looking at, how can I make a change? What can I do? Especially, what are the small things, small changes that I can make that are going to have the biggest impact on my system? Which, again, we talk about that a lot in Write Better Faster. Speaking of Write Better Faster, we have a cohort that's starting up. This class, if you've never taken it before, is the, let's look at every part of your writing life and try and figure out, how do we get you aligned to your best self in your writing life. And then that is starting on September 5th. We have it every other month, Write Better Faster. If you are a writer of any kind and you have never taken this before, I believe in this class, and I believe in the capacity of this class to do the work it needs to do to align your life. And so if you have not done it before, I want you to go check it out. We will put a link in the show notes. I do think that it is, we have done a lot of work to make this class absolute best that it can possibly be. And if you have taken it 6 years ago and you need a refresher, you can take it a second time. It is a different class than it was 6 years ago. Almost completely different than it was 6 years ago, in a good way, though, in a good way. We also have, if you've taken WBF in the past, we also have WBF 201 coming up in October, and you can find all of those on our website. But I so rarely do this of like, let's absolutely push people in this direction. But so often when people come up to these topics, what they're really looking for is not the information they think they're looking for. It's, solve my problem, please, Becca. And if you have been listening to these and you want someone to solve your problem and it's not happening, come to Write Better Faster, come to the Patreon and get coached. Those are the places where we can solve 100% of the problems. The Quitcast is for, how much information can I give you that will be helpful? And it's still only going to help about half of the people who listen to it, because you might fall into outlier places, right? But when you are sitting in front of us and we are helping and coaching, that's when we are the most helpful. So I hope that we will see you at some point if we haven't seen you already. I hope everyone has a great week this week, and we are about to release our topical calls for the Patreon today. And then additionally, we are going to start our 4:30 challenge again in October, which is our 2 minutes in the manuscript. Although we may do it slightly differently in October because it's a pre-nano month. So we'll see what happens. But those of you who participate in nano. All right. I hope everyone has a great week, and we will see you on the next Quitcast. Bye, everybody.